What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another episode in the Ask Me Anything series. We are already halfway through September. We are so close to finally having NHL hockey back. Training camps officially get underway later this week. We've already had some prospect games take place. Ivan Demidov put on an absolute show in one of those the other day. There should be no shortage of things to talk about over the next couple of weeks, so even if your question wasn't featured in this episode, the plan is to do one of these every Monday for the foreseeable future. So keep an eye out on the community tab every Sunday, which is where I make the post to ask you guys for your questions for these episodes. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and start this episode off with the first question from Captain Poppy, who says, what team would you like to see win the lottery and draft Gavin McKenna? Well, that's easy. I'd like to see the Red Wings win the lottery and draft Gavin McKenna, but I'm not sure how realistic that is because I feel like this is going to be another season where the Red Wings finish somewhere in the 80 to 90 point range, which would almost certainly take them out of the running for that first overall pick. So if he's not coming to Detroit, preferably, I'd like him to go to the Western Conference so the Red Wings wouldn't have to play against him all the time. So out of all of the Western Conference teams that I think will be bad enough to have a chance at landing the first overall pick in 2026, there's two teams that I definitely don't want to see him go to, and those two teams are Chicago and San Jose, for obvious reasons. Chicago already has Bedard, San Jose already has Celebrini. I honestly wouldn't mind seeing McKenna end up in Nashville. The Predators are obviously coming off of a very poor season, and I don't think them being bad again this season is out of the realm of possibilities. They had a relatively quiet offseason. Their biggest move was trading for and extending Nick Hague. They made a couple of other minor moves like bringing in Nick Perbix. They traded for Eric Haula. So for the most part, they're bringing back a very similar team, and it is a team with an aging core. A lot of their highest paid players' best seasons are likely behind them. If this team gets off to a slow start again this season and there's no signs that they're going to be able to turn things around, I think it would be in Barry Trotz's best interest to look to blow things up and move on from guys like O'Reilly, Stamkos, and Marchessault. Embrace the tank, at least just for this season. Put yourself in the best possible position to potentially land a franchise-altering player like Gavin McKenna through the draft, which, if you ask me, is exactly the kind of player this Nashville Predators team needs. I will say I think they have a pretty underrated prospect pool. They definitely bolstered it quite a bit in the most recent draft, having 3 picks in the first round, but it is a prospect pool that I definitely think still lacks a true game breaker, a potential top of the lineup superstar, somebody like Gavin McKenna. So if they're able to land that first overall pick and add Gavin McKenna to a prospect pool that already has the likes of Brady Martin, Tanner Mullendike, Wood, Edstrom, and Reed, that would immediately give the Predators one of the brightest futures in the entire NHL. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Chris F., who says, out of players on expiring deals, which ones do you think aren't being talked about enough, where if they leave, it would really impact their team? So aside from the obvious ones who are being talked about all the time, those being Kaprizov and McDavid and those guys, somebody who jumps into my mind right away is Alex Tuch of the Buffalo Sabres. He's heading into the final year of his contract. He's obviously the biggest piece the Buffalo Sabres got as part of the return for Jack Eichel. And Alex Tuch has been a very good Buffalo Sabre. He's surpassed the 35 goal mark in 2 out of the 4 seasons he's played with the Sabres so far. He's the kind of player that a team like Buffalo can absolutely not afford to lose, especially in free agency, but I think even trading him would be a poor outcome for the Sabres, because for such a long time now, the Sabres really have just been in a vicious cycle of having good players come through the organization, develop these players, but then realize they're not really in a position to compete, so they end up trading them. And to make matters worse, usually whenever the Buffalo Sabres end up trading somebody away, that player goes on to do much bigger and much better things elsewhere. Ryan O'Reilly, Jack Eichel, Sam Reinhart all won Stanley Cups pretty much right after leaving Buffalo, and recently they moved on from Dylan Cousins, who was failing to live up to the contract extension that they gave him, and immediately after they traded him, he looked much better and started to produce a lot more with the Senators. It gets to a point where eventually you have to identify your core and really commit to these players long term, and Alex Tuch is somebody that I think absolutely needs to be a part of the core in Buffalo. They can't cheap out on this one and penny pinch in negotiations, because if he ends up leaving, then for the most part that Jack Eichel trade is a complete disaster for the Sabres, as Peyton Krebs really hasn't developed into the impact player that I think the Sabres were hoping for. So unless Noah Ostlund ends up becoming something special for the Sabres, then this is a trade we probably look back on on as one of the worst in NHL history. Again, that is if Alex Tuch ends up leaving, which is something the Sabres just cannot afford to have happen. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Tyler W., who says, we all know Demidov and Nikishin will be in the Calder race. Do you have sleeper picks? I'm not really sure if this is a sleeper pick because I have heard quite a few people throw his name around as somebody who could be in the conversation for the Calder Trophy this season, and that player is Zane Parekh. He played in the Flames' final game this past season, and although it was just one game, he was insanely impressive, scored his first NHL goal, had his fingerprints all over the game offensively. I really think that Zane Parekh has the potential to be one of the best offensive defensemen in the entire NHL, and a team like the Calgary Flames could really use a dynamic offensive player like that, as they still almost made the playoffs this past season, despite the fact that they were one of the worst offensive teams in the entire league. That being said, one thing Zane Parekh does kind of have going against him heading into this season is the fact that the Flames have a bit of a logjam on the blue line. They already have 7 defensemen under contract heading into this season who are making at least $1.1 million. Those guys are Braden Pahal, Daniil Maramonov, Jake Bean, Joel Hanley, Rasmus Anderson, Kevin Ball, and Mac Weegar. And 4 out of those 7 guys are right shot defensemen, same as Zane Parekh, although Mackenzie Weegar can play either side. So Parekh is definitely going to have a very impressive training camp and preseason if he's going to want to make the opening night roster, but if he does and he sticks all season long, he's definitely somebody that I think is more than capable of winning the Calder Trophy this season, especially if they end up trading Rasmus Anderson, which would open up the opportunity for someone like Zane Parekh to get consistent top 4 minutes and quarterback the top power play unit. This next question comes from NTA, who says, thoughts on the Jets offseason acquisitions, and do you think they're going to take a step back this season after winning the President's Trophy? My personal thought on it is the Jets are going to have over 100 points, but not be as competitive as they were last year. I mean, I feel like it would be impossible for the Jets not to take a step back this season. I mean, like you said, they just won the President's Trophy, finishing with 116 points. That would be a very difficult regular season to replicate, even if the Jets were fully healthy and bringing back pretty much the same team. But of course, they're not bringing back pretty much the same team, as they lost one of their best players in Nikolai Ehlers to free agency, and they're also not fully healthy right now, as they're going to be without Adam Lowry to start the season, who is their captain and one of their more important forwards. And as far as their offseason acquisitions go, their 2 biggest ones were Gustav Nyquist and Jonathan Toews, who are 36 and 37 years old respectively. I'm sure both of those guys will prove to be pretty useful in middle to bottom 6 roles, but at the end of the day, I don't think they're really going to move the needle all that much at this point in their careers. So I think I'm kind of in the same boat as you are when it comes to the Jets. I'm expecting a pretty sizable step back from the 116 points they finished with this past season, but I think they still should comfortably be a playoff team. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from TTS428, who says, how do you see the 84 game schedule coming up in the new CBA impacting players and the league? Do you think there will be any unforeseen negative or potentially positive impacts? Really, the only concern that I had with the NHL potentially adding more games to the regular season is that it could mean that the season goes longer and later into the year, which I would not have been a fan of whatsoever. I think the Stanley Cup is already awarded way too late into the summer, but thankfully that is not something we're going to have to worry about, because with them adding 2 more games to the regular season, they're cutting down the preseason and starting the regular season a bit earlier. So in the end, it's really not going to make that much of a difference. Ultimately, it's not a big surprise to see the NHL make this change and go to an 84-game regular season, because it allows for an even schedule. You get 4 games against every other team in your division, 3 games against every team from the other division in your conference, and then 2 games against each team from the other conference. This next question comes from Wheel of Time, a bit of a different one here. The question is there a player in the NHL you hate with a burning intensity? There really isn't. I also don't really even have any teams that I dislike. Like, I don't even think I could pick a least favorite team if I tried, and I think the biggest reason for that is probably because I've been doing this so long and I try and remain as unbiased as possible. And if I had a few teams that I absolutely despised and was always hating on, fans of those teams probably wouldn't enjoy my content very much. And now finally finishing up this episode of the Ask Me Anything series with the final question from Shankly Mania, who says, in your opinion, is the Yzerplan truly done and dusted as a failure? If so, what do you think were the main reasons or decisions for him failing? I really don't think the Yzerplan can be deemed a failure yet. Has it had its bumps in the road? Of course. But ultimately, I feel like the Red Wings are still in a decent spot. They have a solid core of players who are already big-time contributors in the NHL, and they have a pretty strong and deep prospect pool, as well as a lot of cap flexibility, and they're going to have even more in the next year or two. The team that Steve Yzerman inherited was absolutely awful. We knew this was going to be a very long and grueling rebuild. I really just think the Red Wings overachieving in the 2023-24 season and missing the playoffs by just a hair kind of led to people's expectations getting all screwed up. Basically, where I'm at, the timeline that I've kind of built in my head is that I don't think the Red Wings are going to be very good this season. I feel like they're probably going to miss the playoffs again. And then next offseason is really when we start to see the Red Wings roster look a lot different and look a lot better when guys like Sherratt, Hall, and Gustafsson all come off the books. The Red Wings will have a ton of money to spend in a summer where the free agency class is shaping up to be pretty star-studded. And then hopefully by then, heading into the 2026-27 season, guys like Danielson, Brandstad, Nygaard, and Axel Sandin-Pellikka will all be ready to take on full-time roles with the team. If we get to that point and things still aren't looking up, then I feel like you can confidently say the Yzerplan has been a fail. And if that happens, I think the biggest reason for it failing is going to be because of how bad the Red Wings pro scouting is. Because for the most part, the Red Wings have drafted really well throughout Steve Yzerman's tenure. Raymond, Seider, Edvinsson, Casper, they are all already huge parts of the NHL team. It's the free agency signings and some of the trades that he has made that has really left a lot to be desired. Really the only player that Yzerman has brought in since he's became GM, not through the draft, like through free agency or through a trade, that has became a big part of the team and is an important player for the Red Wings is Alex DeBrincat. And I mean, that was kind of a layup because Alex DeBrincat wanted to come to Detroit. Jake Wallman would have been another one, but we can't really say that anymore because we all know how that ended. Don't want to beat a dead horse there. There's no doubt about it though, this next year or two, it feels like it's really going to make or break Steve Yzerman's tenure as Red Wings GM. I mentioned earlier how they have cap flexibility and they're going to be getting even more in the next year or so. It's not going to matter if he's going to spend that money on bad players. So that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Ask Me Anything series. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I plan on doing one of these every Monday for the foreseeable future, so keep an eye out for the post every Sunday on the community tab for you guys to submit your questions. If you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.